Derby County have just this afternoon released information that Matt Hamshaw and Andy Warrington have taken themselves out of their position at Derby County Football Club. This does not come as a surprise to me, and it's one which I really anticipated to have come when John Eustace was announced as the new manager, but it's certainly something which we need to discuss. Matt Hamshaw and Andy Warrington both joined at the same time as Paul Warne around 2.5 years ago, where they went on to help the club to their first promotion from League One, and the first promotion since that year we got promoted to the Premier League. Now, for me, discussing this, it's very interesting to see that they've waited until Monday on essentially 4 days after to make that decision to leave the football club. It sort of gives Derby County that situation where who's going to take the goalkeepers, who's going to be that extra sort of first team coach. Now, I believe that John Eustace will be more involved in the day-to-day coaching than what Paul Warne was. I'm not saying Paul Warne wasn't on the grass, because obviously we know that he was, but we know that it was Richie Barker and Matt Hamshaw taking a lot of the sessions and things like that. And for me, I do think that John Eustace has a group of three that has worked really well with him since he joined Birmingham City, and obviously he'll be able to keep that going, because it's one of those things where he'd essentially be having to teach on the job to be able to get them to where he wanted them, sort of thing, and of the processes he wanted to do. Now, Andy Warrington obviously came in at the same time, has worked with the likes of Josh Vickers, the likes of Joe Wildsmith, obviously Scott Loach, and obviously Jakob Vidal Zetterstrom. Now, ultimately, I do think that there's a lot more at play than them just walking away from the position. Obviously, it comes just a few hours after Paul Warne has been linked with a return to Rotherham United, with Steve Evans struggling over there, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them head back to Rotherham, where they had so much success in the past, and ultimately they're seen as a god when they get promoted, and there's sort of those conversations where it's not necessarily their fault if they were to get relegated. Now, obviously there is some big talking points with this, and who's going to take the goalkeeping unit for Derby County, who is going to step up and be that extra coach if John Eustace wants that. Now, we have no official confirmation from the club of who that will be, although I do believe it will probably be Ross Akins, who I believe is still the head of academy goalkeeping at Derby County, which wouldn't surprise me. I believe Ross Akins played for the club as well when he was younger, and is one of them people who, when I was there at Derby County, was someone who was really easy to approach, and someone who came into the analyst's office quite a lot for his goalkeeper duties and things like that, and I think he could have a real good opportunity there to work with John Eustace and potentially find himself as that first team goalkeeper coach. Now, obviously it could be a situation where John Eustace brings somebody else in, but we will have to wait and see on that one. Now, obviously, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, Paul Warne has been linked with a return to Rotherham, which for me isn't necessarily surprising to see Paul Warne be linked with that return. I think he had a setup at Rotherham which was sort of brilliant for him, where he was always sort of had the positive backing of the fan base, of the board and everything like that, because whenever they went down, they went straight back up, and when they went down, it was never usually sort of because they were... It was always seemed to relate to budgets rather than quality. And now, in my personal opinion, I don't believe Paul Warne is good enough to manage in the Championship, and I think that's something which a lot of people have now seen. The big question will be around whether, if he does take up this new position back at Rotherham, will he be able to get them back to the Championship next season? That's a few questions that's on the people's lips. Obviously, Steve Evans still in a job at Rotherham as of the time of recording this, so it will be very interesting to see how that does develop over the course of the back end of this season. It could be one where the deal is made for once that last game's played and Paul Warne comes in and kicks him into shape for a League One season, where he could potentially pick up some former Derby County players who will be out of contract at that time. Now, it is a very interesting one when we talk about the likes of Matt Hamshaw and Andy Warrington moving on. Obviously, they did lead Derby County for 2 games versus Norwich City and Oxford United, where we picked up 2 points, which was the only 2 points we've picked up this calendar year. But it's one of them where I do believe that a new voice was needed, new faces needed in the dressing room, and I think adding new staff to John Eustace's already triple of staff that he's brought in, I think it's the right thing to do. I think sometimes you just need a different voice, different ideas, and do I believe that Matt Hamshaw and Andy Warrington would have wanted to play the way that John Eustace wanted to play? maybe not. And I think that could be one of the reasons. They probably had a conversation on the bus on the way home, and sort of it would be a case of, this is what we're trying to do, this is where we want to go and how we want to do it, this is how we want to play, this is how we want our set pieces, this is what we want our goalkeeper to do. And then the question would be sort of on Hammy and Andy Warrington about if they could obviously take up that role within the club. Obviously they stayed on initially, but obviously that weekend of thinking about it themselves, maybe having a conversation with Paul Warne and Richie Barker, they decided that it wasn't the right move and they have now stepped away. There is an interview that came out with Stephen Pearce a little bit earlier on today, but when you're watching this it will have been yesterday. There'll be a video out about that tomorrow. I do think that there's a lot in the interview that we need to sort of take note of. I am going to talk about it in a video, and it's one of those for me where I do think that as much as I think they waited too long to get rid of Paul Warne, I think it was the right decision in the end. And bringing in John Eustace, I think, shows that we could attract a high quality manager. And I think that's sort of where this sort of situation sort of ends, really, because are Hammy and Andy Warrington really at that top level where they can sort of add to what John Eustace and his group of staff are wanting to do? Are they at that level where they could really push Derby on and coach Derby to achieve those things? And in my personal opinion, I've said for a while that it should have been a clean sweep once Paul Warne went, in my opinion, and Bucko and Bradley Johnson should have taken that game versus Norwich and then that game versus Oxford United, and they could have had a conversation with John Eustace about how Eustace wanted to play and the way they wanted to change things. Now, it's obviously difficult to see two more people leave Derby County, two people who are involved in a really, really special season, which ultimately I still look back on and think we underachieved. But it was special to get promoted. That moment that I had on the pitch with my granddad, who I go to games with, was something I'll never forget. And I'm obviously really grateful to Paul Warne and the group of players on the pitch that they put in the performances over the season to obviously have that moment. And it's something which a lot of people won't forget. It will be some people's last ever footballing memory with someone. It will be some people's first ever sporting memory with someone. And that's something which I don't think you can take away from people, because football is all about memories. It's all about moments. And obviously when Tom Lawrence scored that screamer against Huddersfield, when he scored those goals against Sheffield United, I was there with my granddad again. And it's those sort of moments that live with you in the memory. And watching those sorts of players, watching Wayne Rooney's debut, watching Louis Sibley score a screamer versus Blackburn Rovers, these are all moments which live with you as a football fan, and you have those moments with the people you go to games with, and it is obviously something that we'll never forget. And although across the course of League One and even the Championship, a lot of people didn't really want Paul Warne, it was one of those situations where he did the job that was necessary of him, and we got ourselves promoted back to the Championship. Now the task is on John Eustace and his new additions in the coaching staff. Will they be able to keep Derby County in the Championship? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you have not done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell, hit the like button if you have not done so already, and I'll catch you in my next video.